Hello and welcome, listeners, to the true iteration of That's a Good Card. I'm Yaw, and with me is the coolest CEDH co-host, Kyle. And he's going to have the challenge of getting me to say, that's a good card. While Kyle will be doing the convincing, I'll be playing devil's advocate. Now is also a good time to remind you to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to us. If you have thoughts that differ from the two of us, leave a comment below and let us know. Or you can suggest the card you think can change the CEDH meta. And don't forget to stay tuned for our favorite closing segment, That's a Good Card? All right, Kyle, let's get started.
All right, yeah. It's always good to talk with you. And today I'm bringing some spice, baby.
Yeah. This might be one of your spiciest, maybe?
Yeah. So, let's just start off by saying big shout out to Brendan H., who actually is our first email submittal. Submittal? Is that a word?
Submitted?
Submission. Our first email submission for a card. And Brendan left a pretty good description, too. So I'm just absolutely shocked by how much, somebody could care about this pet card. So I'm bringing it because, to be honest, this is something that caught my eye right when it was printed. And then I had a chat with somebody pretty quickly after to start testing with it, and I'll kind of get into that a little later. But the card that I'm bringing today is Palantir of Orthanc. Now, Palantir of Orthanc is a 3 cost, so it's 3 generic mana, legendary artifact.
Ooh.
It reads, at the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on Palantir of Orthanc and scry 2. Then, target opponent may have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, you mill X cards, where X is the number of influence counters on Palantir of Orthanc, and that player loses life equal to the total mana value of those cards.
What an essay.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack here. There is no flavor text because they didn't have room for anything. But basically, just to dumb it down a little bit, so at the end of your end step, you're going to put a counter, so you're going to tick up a counter on your Palantir. And every time you do that, you're going to scry 2. Then, after you're done scrying, you target an opponent, so you pick somebody, to have them decide whether or not you get to draw a card or not. If they let you draw a card, you get a card. Woohoo! Awesome. That's it. If they don't want you to draw a card, then what happens is you mill the number of cards from the top of your library equal to the amount of influence counters that you have on it. So turn 1, it's going to be mill 1, turn 2, mill 2, etc., right? And then the mana value of whatever cards are flipped / milled into your graveyard is going to be how much damage that target player takes.
Yeah.
So, quick editor's note before we go any further. There was a ruling that was submitted for this card that directly states that the target for the Palantir of Orthanc's ability will be declared when it goes on the stack. In our description, we kind of talk about targeting after you scry. That's not particularly the case, and I think that's why they made this ruling. So just moving forward, just know that you have to choose your target opponent before you scry. All right, back to the episode. It's pretty confusing, but the good thing about it is you just kind of follow the steps in order as it goes, and there's nothing that's like super crazy wow about it. You kind of just like, okay, pass go, collect $200, okay, and keep going around. So that's kind of how I view the card. But kind of just getting into the decks where we see this card being played.
Yeah.
So CEDH Analytics has this card showing up in 13 decks, which is not a lot. It might be one of the lowest, if not the lowest, of cards that we've brought. But this card is like semi-new. The Lord of the Rings set that came out, what was that? Is that like a year and a half ago? 2 years ago? Even more? I don't know. Probably not. Not more.
Not that more. No.
Not more. Definitely not more. But it's probably like a year and a half is my guess. So it hasn't been out super long time. But out of the 13 decks, I think it's really funny. 4 of them were actually our good friend Connor's Zuladoc list.
Yes, right.
At different iterations of the list over time. So what I was alluding to earlier, I talked to Connor about this card right when it came out because he was super high on it. Now, since then, it has come out of his CEDH Zuladoc list, but it was in the list for, I think, a few months, which is why we see 4 different iterations of it. It was also seen in a Crick list that was really reanimator heavy, a Kinnan list, which I thought was fascinating, and then an Atraxa list and a couple of other more fringe lists. So I honestly was a little surprised that there weren't more reanimator heavy lists besides that one Crick list. Did that surprise you too?
I'm not too surprised because I think this card, when you look at it, it's like it does a lot, but it's like not as much as the One Ring, right? And I actually really like the way this kind of plays thematically with the One Ring. Like you can't target a player that played the One Ring like on a previous turn, and so I think that it kind of got overshadowed, really, like literally, like the One Ring and Orcish Bowmaster were such giants, right? In terms of coming from that scent, plus a couple other cards like Legolas's Quick Reflexes. Like I had to do a double take.
Delighted
Halfling.
Halfling.
Right, Delighted Halfling. I had to do a double take. I was like, oh, this is from Lord of the Rings. I was surprised to hear you even say that you were looking at this because it didn't trigger anything for me when I was looking through all of the spoilers. It was just, again, it's also a lot of text to kind of like parse through in terms of like, oh, it's going to do what and what and what, and like, how is that beneficial for me? And my brain is like, no, I'm going to deal with that later.
Too long, didn't read, not playing it. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to get into my points now. A few of them are backed by Brendan, who kind of gave us the jump off point for this card. But to backtrack slightly, one of the reasons why I decided to bring this card to you now is actually because this is a card that I've been really interested in my new Corvold Landfall CEDH list that I've been working on.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because I'm having a lot of trouble finding card draw engines or card advantage engines in Jund colors. And this one's really interesting. So I'll kind of get into, let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I feel like I'm going on a huge tangent before I do my first step. So cool. So my first point is whether you're milling or drawing, this is card advantage. So decks whose yard is an extension of their hand, right? So we're talking breach decks, we're talking reanimator lists, we're talking dredge decks. They absolutely love this.
Yep.
Something that's super interesting that I've noticed more and more post Dockside ban is I've been seeing a rise in reanimator lists again.
For sure.
I've seen more Rafine. I've seen more Dimir reanimator stuff. Just a good amount of reanimating Broodlord, reanimating Razaketh. There's just a lot of it. So I think that any list that is sans blue particularly could want to run this card. Because if you're in blue, you have access to like really, really good card advantage and card draw engines. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think that there's a competition between, those card draw engines. But the way that this card works, if you're in that Venn diagram of you play out of your yard and you're in need of better card advantage tools, this could be the card for you. So that's my first point.
Yep.
It is card advantage, especially so for the people who play out of their yard. Sure, if you get the option of draw a card every turn, it's pretty solid, right? For 3 cost, draw a card every turn, you're not going to really complain off that. Most of the time, that's what we're getting from a lot of card draw engines, bar the super OP ones. But a card every turn is not bad. With that, I'll kind of segue into my second point, which is it's not just a card every turn. It's a higher quality card every turn. Because Scry 2 is super underrated on this card. Not only are you just getting that one card draw potentially, or multiple cards milled, right? Because you get to scry, the quality of the cards, like you're getting to quote unquote see more cards than just that one that you're reading. Like you're like, oh, I'm just going to only draw one card. Like that's okay, It's much more impactful if you're drawing a card that you want versus drawing a card that you may not want. So I think it's really important that you get to do that Scry 2 first before anything else happens. And, Brendan put this in the email. He thinks that Scry is really underrated because, CEDH decks, we run a lot of great cards. Every single card really is a great card. The problem that you'll run into is that these great cards are not always great in all circumstances.
Yep.
So being able to filter into the cards that you need at that specific moment becomes really impactful. Like, I don't think anyone would ever question how good Scry is in a one-on-one format, right? Because obviously, especially in the lower deck, like card count ones, where you know exactly what's in your deck, you know exactly what you're looking for exactly the matchup
deeper.
you're playing. Yeah. Exactly, and you have 4-ofs and stuff like that. Like, Scry is very powerful in those lists because you know exactly what you're looking for. But in EDH, I think people are turned off by Scry because they don't always know what they're looking for, right? So that's my second point, is that Scry is really underrated, especially in tandem with it's a Scry into a draw or a Scry into a mill, right? Or multiple mills, or you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's my second point. What do you think about Scry and CEDH?
I think it's pretty helpful, right? I think that I was actually thinking about it, and we'll lightly touch on one of the things. I guess it's like this card kind of does the thing I want more than Scry, which is like or surveil, right? Essentially that's the last half of this card is like a surveil
you mean
ability.
Just like binning?
Just binning it, right? Like because just binning because like even if you don't need it right now, like you can save it for later, right? And that's kind of like why most people like reanimator or like playing out of their graveyard. So I mean, and this card gives that to you, right? And so
well, that's under the assumption that people are going to choose to make you mill, right? Is that your gut reaction?
Yeah, my gut reaction is most people are going to probably have you mill rather like so that it's known information. Right. And like that way you get less of that gotcha that we always talk about, because now it's like, OK, I know that's coming. And I'm coming at this from I started playing the deck I'm really starting to get really keen on is Will and Lucas, or Wernog and Bjorna. And that was a heavy Dockside list. And then I decided to turn that into a heavy Abdel list. Like, I'm really interested in this card because it's letting me do the thing I want, which is to bin more cards into my graveyard. What I have found, and I think you've kind of found, is like you kind of play with your hand face up a little bit when people know that you're going to be
playing out of your yard,
playing out of that yard. And so I like the Scry because it lets you filter deeper, right? So now I get to potentially bin the thing I want more, like a Savines or whatever it is. I think Scry is definitely underrated. I think it's not something I consider on a card that often, besides Thrasios.
Yeah, I think the last time that I've scryed in CEDH was when I Praetor's Grasp somebody's Thassa's Oracle as Corvold, and then Tainted Pacted, and then the Tainted Pact got countered, so then I just scryed 2 with my Thassa's, making really sad noises.
Yeah.
The entire time.
That's probably the last time I did it too.
But to be honest, even when your Thassa's get stuffed, at least you get your pity scry.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you didn't win the game, but you know what? You get to look at some cards.
Oh, I don't want those
Congratulations.
Cards. Yeah. Put those all
like,
on the bottom.
well, I lose. Oh, well. But anyway, I'll go into my last point, which is my favorite point, which is that politicking can just be super fun with this card. And there's kind of levels to politicking with this card, because you're really interacting with your opponents. It's required for this card. So in doing that, you can do a lot of different things. You can make deals with people. You can say, hey, I'll let your Ragavan through as long as you choose to let me draw a card. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you'll be like, oh, I'll play this second spell that I don't really need to play if it triggers one of your second speller, value pieces, if you let me draw a card, So you can play those kinds of games to kind of get more value out of it if you want to draw. Or, quite the opposite, you can just ask people to mill, if you're like, I just want to feed my yard. Are you cool with doing that? And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. You know what I mean? So with this card is one of those cards where you always ask in some capacity. But at the same time, if you start getting pushback, that's when the game is on with this card. So, because then at that point, you're picking the person with the lowest health every single time, and you can start playing mind games. You know what I mean? Because you scry first. So while you're doing your scry, you can be like, oh, that's a good card. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I want this card so bad. Like, this wins me the game. You know, you could just start playing complete mind games with the person to the point where, especially if you know the person you're playing against, like, I think this card probably performs a lot better in just like CEDH with friends than probably tournament.
Yeah.
CEDH. But I think that you can get into some funny stuff by trying to fake people out or politicking in a way where you can end up dealing big damage to your opponent who you think is going to make you mill, or just getting the card that you want. So you just get a Scry 2 draw 1, which Scry 2 draw 1 is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty great.
Yep.
So that's my last point my last like real point, and then I kind of have a soft other point. But my third point is the politicking with this card can be really powerful. And sometimes you never know if you're unassuming or you're playing from a behind position, or people don't really know how your deck functions or whether or not you want to play out of your yard. You know, sometimes people might just be amicable and just do whatever you want them to do, you know?
True.
So that's my third point. My last point is that because it's colorless, it can kind of just fit into any color pie. Yeah. I mean, this is a pretty much like it's just a by the book, like low hanging fruit thing. But I think it's I touched on it a little bit in the beginning in the intro. Decks that have trouble building card advantage or have trouble just drawing cards in general, I think that this card's pretty sweet. It's, you know, only 3 costs, so it's less than a 1-ring. You can effectively, I would say it's a very easy to get out turn 2. It's possible to get out turn 1. Yeah. But I think that you're probably going to be consistently playing this on turn 2. And, you know, with my games recently, I've been seeing turn 5s and 6 a lot more consistently. Granted, my meta is very slow, but I've been seeing turn 5s and 6s, and if you get to turn 6 and you have 6 influence counters on that bad boy, oof, I mean, you're getting your Scry 2 draw card. People aren't going to just eat 10, 15 damage from the mill. So, I mean, at a certain point, it becomes a guaranteed Scry 2 draw card.
Hopefully the game
but that's
goes
my
that
last
long.
point. Yeah, hopefully. If the game goes that long, yeah, people are whittled down.
Something I just thought about while we were talking about it, that is subtle, right? It's kind of a subtle advantage, is like a reminder to folks that this card will trigger right on the end step. And so that's the last chance anybody's going to get to kind of try to disrupt what you're about to do, right? Like I played a game last night where we all forgot about this stupid Codex Shredder sitting on Tameshi's board, and it kept milling the cards that we were tutoring to the top because the game went to like turn 5, turn 6. And I think that something really kind of cool about this is as soon as everybody passes on this trigger happening, like you get to manipulate and you get to decide what this is going to be, and they're not going to be able to touch this, right? Because the whole ability has to resolve right before anybody else gets priority. And so while you're wheeling and dealing, like Kyle was saying, like I think it's really important to be able to like really just stack that. And I think this grind just got sold on me a little bit more, right? Like just knowing that once this starts resolving, that's it. Nobody's going to be able to touch it until well after it's resolved.
And the cool thing too is that your Scry happens before your opponent picks mill or draw. So if you Scry, and let's say that there's like some big bad on the board. There's a big, Obnixilis that's absolutely massive. Yep. You Scry and you see Swords of Plowshares.
Yep.
And you say, yo, I just Scryed for this Swords of Plowshares.
Put it in my hand.
Now. You know what I mean? Yep. And they can be like, oh yeah, sure. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I think that that's super impactful.
Yep.
Cool. All right, let's get into it. Dig into this card. I'm fighting an uphill battle with this one. I know. But here's the thing. And I'm going to keep standing on my podium here. But here's the thing. So many people have asked if I've tested this card or I've tried this card or I've thought about this card. I think it's right there. It's on the precipice.
It's absolutely a 99, 100. I agree.
It's somewhere between the 99th include and the 108th include, and that's why I love it. So maybe 111th include. Ooh. When you're building a list from scratch and you have 165 cards in your list, I bet you this is one of them. All right, dig into it. Let's go.
My first downside, the first thing you should consider is like, I think this card does a lot. It absolutely does a lot. I just think the timing of when the trigger happens is a bit of a downside. It's because you're going to go through your turn, you're going to make your game actions, and then you're going to have like hindsight to go, oh shoot, you have to plan on hopefully seeing that Swords to Plowshare, kind of planning on that, and then leaving up white mana into your end step. Because while it is good card advantage, it's also like the timing is just kind of like, oof, I kind of wish I had this creature, right, that I'm scrying and I see, and I don't care if it's in the bin or in my hand or in the bin. Like, I wish I had known this, though, before I went through my whole turn, right? And so that timing does kind of change the kind of potential flow of the game for you. Or if it doesn't, like, it's always like that information that you know later. Yes, you can argue that it's no different than getting a Rhystic draw on somebody else's turn, but that's like a draw that goes into your hand, like, for sure, versus like putting the fate of this card into somebody else's hand if you're newer and you're not as comfortable with like the politicking. Mm-hmm. And so this is a good card to kind of learn how to do that. But I do think that the timing for me is awkward. Like, if you're just trying to make sure that you're hitting tempo plays, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, like, I wish I had this card at, like, I wish I had this gamble at the beginning of my turn, or but like, oh, okay, cool, like, I guess I can play it next turn. Except Kyle decided to put it into the bin. Right now I won't be able to gamble. I'm just gonna have to try to get it some other way, or like scry that to the bottom.
Just from the way you think about it, I think we have a little bit of a differing perspective on the timing of this card. So like what you're describing, why it sounds clunky to you is because in the end step you're feeling like there's a lack of setup, right? Yeah. Like, it's not allowing you to set things up. What's interesting is I actually like the timing on this because it is consistent. Because you know it's going to happen every turn. So you're going to have that opportunity every turn. I think that is as a rebuttal, a good thing about the timing. So you can use a top deck tutor in your main phase if there's something on the board that needs policing. If you know that you're going to go into another turn where someone's going to untap and they're going to be putting a win attempt on the stack, you can use a top deck tutor in your own main phase, point to another opponent and say, hey, I'm going to top deck tutor exactly what we need to stop this next person. Work with me here, So I think that because of the consistency of the knowledge that you will get the opportunity to potentially draw a card in your end step, as long as somebody else is willing to work with you, I think that is actually a positive for the timing of it, because it is consistent. You know it's going to happen every end step.
It is going to happen, but again, I think that where the cases you're kind of like when you say that, I immediately think of a Tymna or a Yuriko, right? That where you get that card draw after combat, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's because of the decks I kind of play. The Will and Lucas deck I'm playing, like, I found out I can kind of win on somebody else's turn, which is kind of cool. Like, I can win at instant speed, which is kind of really nice.
Sure.
And again, I think I think you make a really good point, but I do think that if you're kind of new to this card, you do have to consider that, like, this trigger that's going to happen at the end, and kind of plan your turn maybe a little bit differently than you would normally, right? To me,
is it a bad argument for me to say that I think that the card might have an advantage to it happening at your end step? If it happened at the beginning, you have a bigger target on your head, right? People aren't going to be wanting to work with you or give you what you want if you're going into your turn. Whereas I think you could easily make the politicking argument of, like, just give me the card. Look, I'm literally passing. I'm going to my end step. Like, it's gone. Like, I'm going to hopefully find something that can help with the rest of the board. You know what I mean? And I think that argument is pretty sweet because people don't really see it as a threat until it happens over and over again. Same shit happens with Braids, Arisen Nightmare. That card, in every end step, you start getting 3 cards around, and then people start realizing, like, oh, this is a lot worse than I thought. You've drawn 9 cards off of this? Huh. This is a problem, because people don't realize, they're like, oh, it's in the end step, it's whatever, they're not going to do anything, I have to worry about the person who's about to untap. I have to worry about that person. So I think it's kind of interesting.
No, I agree. And I think I'm speaking about it from I have had so many games where I think, like, the meta is not as slow. It is slower, for sure. It is slower, but it's still not like that slow, right? It's like a turn slower. And so I think I've been caught in a couple circumstances where, again, that classic, like, ooh, if I only had one more turn, right? If it got back to my turn, I could have won. And so I kind of see this kind of happening at the end step, kind of in that vein. So yeah, that's just my point on the timing. The second downside I have is that with the way the meta has kind of shaken out, at least in my local pod here, and some of the games I played in Vegas as well, it is a lot more stacksy. I'm definitely seeing maybe more Dranith, or maybe I'm just kind of looking for it. I'm also seeing a lot more, because Kinnon's back more. I'm also seeing a lot more Grafdigger's Cages.
Yeah.
And I played a game last night, and again, this is probably why it's so fresh in mind. Not only was there a Dranith, there was also a Grafdigger's Cage out, right? Which kind of shut off the Underworld Breach lines. This can feel really bad going into this type of card, right? Like now they're going to probably not give you the card draw ever, like depending on the situation. And you have to pray that nobody decides to all of a sudden, out of nowhere, play Rest in Peace. Not a card you see very often.
Sure.
But it is a card that exists out there that you have to be kind of wary of for this type of card. And the fact that it's the fate of those cards sit in somebody else's, like one of your opponent's decision, that can kind of feel kind of
just like it's out of your control.
Right. It's out of your control.
Yeah.
So just the stacks.
Yeah. I mean, my counter argument to that is if you're playing a stacksy game, I think Palantir becomes super powerful, because at that point, those influence counters are going to start stacking up. And at that point, if somebody ever points at you to mill into a Rest in Peace, they're still taking that damage. You might be hitting people for 12, 10 to, shit, at like a turn 7 game. If you got this out early, you could hit someone potentially for like 20 damage with this card. It's possible. Is it likely? Probably not. But depending on your list, if you're in a reanimator list and you have these big bombs, or you're playing World Gorger, just like boop, popping people. That's all I gotta say.
And I guess I'm gonna go into my last point on that note, is that I think that the life total can matter, but I guess I'm not as worried about it, because I guess when I think about the decks that play this card, I think about, for whatever reason, I think of black right away, the fact that you talked about top deck tutors and whatnot. So I also assume then when somebody's playing black, let's say 80%, 85% of decks are playing Adnaz if you're in black. I don't know. That's kind of a number.
No, not anymore. Not anymore.
You don't think so?
No, I think after the ban post Dockside and Mana Crypt loss, Adnaz counts are way down, especially because Blue Farm is almost I would say that it used to be like a 50-50 or even more so. Now it's there's very few Blue Farm players running Adnaz now. So I think Adnaz has actually dropped off the face of the earth. Maybe that's a little aggressive, but Adnaz has fallen in almost every list that's not Roxai or another turbo list.
Like I said, I'm still living in that kind of post that, for whatever reason, pre ban world, and so in my head, a lot of lists are a little bit lower on CMC, and so if people were still willing to rip an Adnaz, then I'm a little bit less worried about potentially the overall average mana value of decks that may or may not be running this, and so I could probably eat my words on that one, but I would be happy to. I'll probably slot this in. I have actually a good spot for this card that I can swap this out pretty easily with in my current list. And so I'll give it a try, and I'll report back through our Patreon video if I get completely dinged by Kyle for 18 life in some game.
Yeah, and while we're talking about it, I'm definitely going to be testing this in my Corvold Landfall list. Probably against you. So look out for this.
Yeah. So super psyched.
Yeah, just because I fit into that Venn diagram right in the center where it's I want to draw cards because I need card draw engine, but at the same time I want to fill my yard. So it's if you are checking both boxes, sure, it's pretty sweet. Also, I love Lord of the Rings, and it's a super cool card.
It is a really cool card. All right, Kyle. Before we get into the points that both kind of support the downsides and upsides, I want to take a second to thank Brendan. I was not expecting this dialogue to be this good and back and forth. Thanks for making this recommendation. Yeah. I really enjoyed this one. Perfect.
It's a perfect card for us to talk about. I think that there's going to be probably, I'm going to set the over-under at about 18 comments on the Reddit post that say, no, this is too slow. You're bad at CEDH. And then And then on the YouTube comments, let's set it at like 4. But they say the same thing, but nicer. The YouTube commenters are always so much nicer.
Nice.
They let us down easy. I love it. Yeah. So if you want to let us down easy, please do so below in the comments.
Because we know you've actually listened, and that's really helpful.
Oh, 100%.
And really awesome.
100%. Yeah, I think it's great. So we'll get a couple people be like, hey, enjoy the content. This card's ass. Those are my favorite. Those are my favorite.
All right, Kyle. What point of mine do you think makes the most sense for it being not a great card?
Well, that's really difficult because this card's an absolute banger, obviously. But it's hot. I don't want to say it. I don't want to validate all the commenters on the Reddit who don't even listen to our video. But
they're never going to get to this point.
It can be a little slow to ramp up. I'll give you that. We didn't talk about it that much, but if you draw this card later on, it kind of blows. Yeah. So if you're like drawing this turn 4 and you're like, dang it, now I just get to play this thing that's really slow. And like, unless you're playing with the homies in the CEDH game and one of the homies loves mono white stacks, and you know you're strapping into a 4-hour CEDH game, like that's the only time this card's going to feel good. But I mean, it feels tough when you draw this later on and you're opening mulligans. If you can get this out turn 1, like that's Magic Christmas Dreamland. I think it'll start doing work, probably filling your yard early and then turning into a Scry 2 draw 1. So that's your best point. It's just it can be a little slow if you don't get it out early.
And the point
So sorry, I forgot. I was supposed to ask the same question back to you. My bad. All right, y'all. What point of mine do you think is the strongest point for testing Palantir of Orthanc?
You know what? It's the Scry.
Okay, underrated Scry. Let's go.
Underrated Scry. Like being able to filter towards the card and like again, just being able to dig, right? Like I love games where even if I lose, like I've gone through like 30 cards in my deck where it feels like, okay, I at least got to really get a chance towards doing this, especially if I didn't mill those cards or those cards weren't milled on my behalf where I chose to kind of do that. Like, yeah, I think that that's pretty underrated to be able to keep cards into your library that you can kind of go tutor for later because they're not useful right now. I think that's pretty powerful.
Yep. Sweet. Scry, underrated. Cool. Yep. All right, it's time. What all the people want. This is what the people want. Is Palantir of Orthanc a good card?
I'm going to give this a no for now, but that's going to be to be determined because, like, I feel like it's going to be good, but like, I really do think the for me, like that timing, my own argument, like that's kind of like my big, and I just might need to be shown the light. That's all.
Dang, we got a no from Ya. That's how you know we're down bad. No! We didn't even get a tepid yes. We got a no from y'all. Oh, man. I'm starting to regret everything right now. Commenters, if you... anyone who is a stan for this card, I hope Brendan is in the comments writing a freaking novel about how wrong you are, y'all. I want there to be more stands of this card. I want there to be more people play CEDH and are like, yes, in CEDH, this card is good. Oh, I wish.
My asterisk is I'm totally going to be, like I said, I know exactly which slot I can kind of add this into the deck I'm playing. This does try to do the things I want it to do, and I'm going to be testing it. And so I'll report back for sure.
All right, y'all. It's time for your favorite closing segment. That's a good card, question mark? So if you haven't played this game with us before, we like to close out our podcast by playing a game where I will be providing Ya with an obscure Magic the Gathering card, one that we hope he's never heard of before. And it's going to be his job, as well as yours, the listener, to guess everything about this card. I'm just going to be giving you the name. You're going to guess color, type, cost, power, toughness if it's a creature, everything about it, even down to the flavor text and the art. All right, y'all, are you ready for this week's card?
I'm ready.
Your card is Essence Fracture.
Essence Fracture.
Yeah, before you start, pause the video, listeners, and try to play along with us. Comment in the YouTube comments down below your guess. Essence Fracture.
I actually feel like I've seen this card. I want to say it's blue.
Ooh. Blue?
It's blue. I want to say it's an enchantment.
Ooh. Enchantment.
Oh, shoot. Hold on a second. I actually think this came in... No, that's a different card. Essence Fracture, I think, is a blue enchantment for 4 generic pips and a blue pip. That's right. We're going out of the norm.
5 costs.
5 costs.
So 5 cost blue enchantment.
Oh boy, shoes! It better do some crazy things.
Yeah.
I want to say that.
What's the image in your mind?
Yeah.
Now?
The image is of like I'm gonna say a being. It could be human. It could be something else. Where its soul is getting pulled into like a prism, and then on the other side is just light being kind of like thrown out.
Oh, being shot out. Okay. Wow, that's fun. And what does this card do?
I want to say, okay, for 4 and a blue, I want to say that like when a creature token ETBs under your control, make another copy of it.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty powerful, but not.
Wait, what? That's crazy. Okay, so it's if you were to make a creature token, make another copy of it?
Yeah. Yep.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Not
Any
two
flavor
more
text on this bad boy?
Yeah, I want to say like the flavor text is going to be, we'll take it apart and put it back together and see what we come up with. Jace.
The mind sculptor or the dude who went to high school with me?
The guy who went to high school with you.
Oh, okay. Random Jace.
Yeah, random Jace. Okay.
All right.
How wrong was I? Let's go.
I mean, look, you did kind of good because it is a blue card.
Okay.
That being said,
that's it.
Oh no, well, you got half credit on the mana cost because it is a 5 cost card.
Oh wow.
It's a blue card. It's 3 and 2 blue.
Okay, I thought that was the other thought.
It's a sorcery.
Okay.
It reads, return 2 target creatures to their owner's hands.
I knew that was the other part.
And it has cycling for 2 and a blue, so 3 mana cycling, which means you can discard the card from your hand and draw a card. So 3 mana cycling is
3 mana cycling?
3 mana, yeah. I'm steep.
Jeez.
But the flavor text reads, shaping reality is simply a matter of knowing where to apply pressure. Quote, Ixidor Reality Sculptor.
Ixidor. What's the art?
I don't know
Describe
who
the
that
art.
is. The art looks like the lead singer of a metal band.
I love it.
Being shattered by shards of glass.
Okay.
That's basically it. Or ice. I don't know if it's ice or glass, but it really does look like the lead singer of a metal band being shattered by glass. But it was printed in Onslaught. You want to guess how much this card's going for right now?
28 cents.
9 cents. It's bad.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you did a pretty good job. Yeah. I'll give you a tepid 20% out of 100% possible.
I bet you somebody in the comments is going to get this card. I'm pretty sure this card
I don't know.
There's
no other printings. This isn't even, there's no like reprintings or anything. It was literally just Onslaught. Anyway, thank you all for listening to today's episode on Palantir of Orthanc. And thank you so much to Brendan H. for today's suggestion. Please direct your attention below to our description where you'll find our link tree as well as links to our Discord and Patreon. In our link tree, you'll find all the places we host our podcast, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And a link to our Discord is a wonderful place where you can join us and join the Taxi community. We play games, we talk decks, we talk everything CEDH in there. So if you haven't joined already, go ahead and hop in. We'd love to have you. And if you're interested in additional Tag C content, go ahead and subscribe to our Patreon, which will be linked below. We post extra podcasts as well as review old cards that we have already reviewed just to see how they shape up in the meta today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and we will see you next Monday.
Thank you. Bye.